The Broken Warrior. The observation deck on Nexus Prime Station was nearly empty at this hour. Most travelers were either sleeping or drinking away their troubles in the lower levels. General Vexthera preferred it this way. The massive viewing windows showed nothing but stars and the occasional passing ship, but she was not really looking at them. Her 6 crystalline fingers drummed against the metal railing as memories she had tried to bury for years came flooding back. General Vexthera. A young voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see a Zelani reporter holding a recording device. The creature's blue skin shimmered with nervous energy. "I'm Kira Vell from Galactic News Network. I was hoping to speak with you about your military service." Vexthera's compound eyes studied the reporter for a long moment. Her crystalline armor, now dulled with age, caught the light from the stars. "There are many generals you could interview, young one. Why seek out an old warrior who has been retired for 5 years? Because you're the only Korthak general who ever fought humans and lived to tell about it," Kira said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And because you're the only one who walked away from active duty at the height of your career." The mention of humans made Vexthera's mandibles click together in what might have been pain or regret. She gestured to a nearby bench. "Sit, reporter. But know this. What I am about to tell you may change how you see warfare forever." Kira settled onto the bench, her recording device ready. Vexthera remained standing, her 4 arms folded behind her back, as she stared out at the stars. "I was different once," Vexthera began. "I believed in the old ways. I thought strength came from armor and weapons, from the ability to crush your enemies without mercy. The Korthak Empire had conquered 47 worlds using these beliefs. I personally led the assault on 12 of them." She paused, her memory taking her back to those days of glory and conquest. "We were unstoppable. Our exoskeletons could withstand plasma fire. Our weapons could melt through solid steel. We moved like living tanks across battlefields, and nothing could stand against us. Then the High Command decided to expand into human space." Kira leaned forward, fascinated. "What did you think when you first saw humans?" A sound that might have been laughter came from Vexthera's throat. "I thought it would be the easiest campaign of my career. We had studied their anatomy, their technology, their military structure. They were soft creatures with thin skin and fragile bones. Their weapons were primitive projectile throwers that fired small metal slugs. They had no natural armor, no claws, no poison. They were everything we were not." The general's posture shifted, becoming more rigid. The first engagement was at Epsilon Colony. It was a mining world with perhaps 50,000 humans living there. Our intelligence said they had maybe 100 soldiers for defense. The plan was simple: land, overwhelm their defenses, secure the mining facilities. It should have taken 6 hours. "But it didn't," Kira said, already knowing the answer. "No, it took 6 days." Vexthera's voice grew quiet. "The humans had only 97 soldiers, just as our intelligence reported. But they had something our intelligence could not measure. They had Captain Elena Vasquez. The names seemed to hang in the air between them." Vexthera continued, her voice taking on a different tone, almost respectful. "Vasquez was a small woman, even by human standards. She could not have weighed more than 60 kilograms. When I first saw her through my scope, I thought she was a civilian who had picked up a weapon by mistake. She wore no armor except a simple vest. Her rifle was standard issue, nothing special. But when she spoke into her communicator, her soldiers listened like she was speaking the words of their gods." Vexthera began to pace, her movements betraying an agitation that had been building for years. "We landed our forces at dawn. 3,000 Korthak warriors against less than 100 humans. By every law of warfare, by every tactical manual ever written, we should have swept them aside in minutes, but something happened that I still do not fully understand." She stopped pacing and looked directly at Kira. "The humans did not fight the way we expected. They did not form battle lines or try to match our firepower. Instead, they scattered like water, appearing and disappearing. striking at us from directions we never expected. But that was not the strangest part. What was? Kira asked breathlessly. They were protecting something. Not territory, not resources, not strategic positions. They were protecting their evacuation ships. 23 vessels filled with civilians, men, women, children, elderly. These ships were slow and vulnerable, sitting targets that any competent force could destroy in minutes. Vexthera's compound eyes seemed to focus on something far away. I ordered my forces to target the evacuation ships. It was sound tactical thinking. Threaten what the enemy values most, and they will surrender or make mistakes. But when our weapons locked onto the first ship, something extraordinary happened. She resumed pacing, her movements becoming more agitated. Every human soldier on that planet suddenly appeared between us and those ships. Not just the ones assigned to guard them. Every single one. They abandoned their cover, their defensive positions, their tactical advantages. They stood in the open, making themselves perfect targets, just to shield those evacuation vessels. That's suicide, Kira whispered. Yes, Vexthera agreed. It was suicide. And it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in warfare. The general sat down heavily on the bench, her armor creaking with the movement. I had my warriors hold fire for a moment, thinking the humans would come to their senses and retreat. But they did not move. Captain Vasquez stood at the front of the line, her small rifle aimed at my command unit. She had no chance of hitting me at that range with such a primitive weapon, but she stood there anyway. Then I heard her voice over the radio frequencies. She was not speaking to us. She was speaking to her soldiers. She said, "Remember why we're here. Remember who we're protecting. Remember that some things are worth dying for." Vexthera's mandibles clicked together rapidly, a sign of deep emotion in her species. My second-in-command, Colonel Thexmore, asked for permission to open fire. He said we could kill them all in 30 seconds and be done with it. But I found myself hesitating, not because I feared their weapons, but because I could not understand their actions. "What did you do?" Kira asked. I tried to reason with them. I activated my external speakers and spoke directly to Captain Vasquez. I told her that her position was hopeless, that her soldiers would die for nothing, that surrender was the only logical choice. Do you know what she said to me? Kira shook her head. She said, "General, you're right. We will probably all die here. But behind us are 23 ships carrying 15,000 people who trust us to keep them safe. If dying here means those ships get away, then it's not dying for nothing. It's dying for the only thing that matters." Vexthera stood up abruptly, her frustration evident. I gave them one final chance to surrender. I told them I would give them safe passage if they laid down their weapons. Captain Vasquez looked at me through her scope and said, "General, I respect your offer, but you misunderstand us. We're not here to surrender. We're here to buy time." "Time for what?" Kira asked. "Time for those evacuation ships to reach the jump point. Time for 15,000 innocent people to escape to safety. Time for something more important than their own lives." Vexthera's voice grew heavy with memory. And so they stood there, 97 humans against 3,000 of us, and they held their ground. The general walked back to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. The battle lasted 18 hours. 18 hours of the most intense fighting I had ever experienced. The humans used tactics we had never seen before. They turned their weakness into strength, their small size into an advantage. They moved through the battlefield like shadows, striking at us from everywhere and nowhere. But they were still outnumbered 30-1, Kira pointed out. Yes, but they were not fighting to win. They were fighting to delay. Every minute they held us was another minute for those ships to get farther away. They used every trick, every desperate tactic, every impossible maneuver you could imagine. They turned construction equipment into weapons, civilian vehicles into mobile bunkers, mining explosives into improvised artillery. Vexthera's voice became quieter, more reverent. I watched Private Danny Martinez, a boy who could not have been more than 20 years old, charge a full squad of my warriors with nothing but a mining laser and a prayer. He died, but he bought his comrades 3 more minutes. I saw Sergeant Amy Richardson stay behind to cover a wounded soldier, knowing she would not make it out alive. I saw Captain Vasquez herself, wounded and bleeding, continue to coordinate her forces even as her life ebbed away. By the end of the 18 hours, we had lost over 400 warriors. The humans had lost 89 of their soldiers. Only 8 remained alive, and they were all wounded. But they had accomplished their mission. All 23 evacuation ships had escaped to safety. Kira was silent for a long moment, processing the story. What happened to the survivors? I found Captain Vasquez among the wounded. She was dying, but she was still conscious. I knelt beside her and asked her why she had done it, why she had thrown away her life and the lives of her soldiers for strangers. She looked at me with those strange human eyes and said something that changed my understanding of warfare forever. What did she say? Vexthera turned away from the window and looked directly at Kira. She said, "General, strength isn't about what you can destroy. It's about what you choose to protect. We may not be as strong as you, but we know what's worth fighting for." The observation deck fell silent except for the hum of the station's life support systems. Vexthera seemed lost in thought, reliving those moments from years ago. "That was the beginning," she said finally. "The beginning of my education about what humans really are. What I learned on Epsilon Colony was nothing compared to what came later. The real lesson was yet to come." She looked at Kira's recording device, then back at the reporter. "Are you ready to hear about the day I learned that everything I believed about strength and warfare was wrong? The day I met Colonel Marcus Webb and understood why the human spirit cannot be broken." Kira nodded eagerly, her blue skin shimmering with anticipation. "Then let me tell you about the Battle of Terra's Gate," Vexthera said, settling back onto the bench. "Let me tell you about the day I learned that the strongest warriors are not always the ones who survive, but the ones who choose to sacrifice everything for others. The price of understanding." Vexthera sat back down on the bench, her crystalline armor reflecting the distant stars. The weight of her memories seemed to press down on her shoulders as she prepared to continue her story. Kira waited patiently, her recording device capturing every word. "The Battle of Terra's Gate happened 3 months after Epsilon Colony," Vexthera began. "By then, the war had spread across 6 systems. What we had expected to be a quick conquest had become a grinding campaign that cost us more warriors every day. The High Command was growing impatient, and I was ordered to end the conflict quickly." She paused, her compound eyes reflecting the starlight. Terra's Gate was the humans' last major stronghold in the outer colonies. It was a massive space station built into an asteroid, with defensive platforms that could destroy entire fleets. Our intelligence said it was commanded by Colonel Marcus Webb, a veteran of their previous wars against other species. "What made this battle different?" Kira asked. "Everything," Vexthera replied. "From the moment we arrived in the system, nothing went according to plan. We expected the humans to turtle up inside their fortress and force us into a costly siege. Instead, Colonel Webb did something unprecedented. He sent us a message." The general's mandibles clicked in what might have been admiration. The message was simple. "General Vexthera, I know your reputation as an honorable warrior. Before we begin killing each other, I propose we meet under a flag of truce to discuss terms. Perhaps we can avoid unnecessary bloodshed on both sides." "You agreed to meet with him?" Kira asked, surprised. "I almost didn't. In Korthek culture, such a meeting would be seen as a sign of weakness. But something about his message intrigued me. No enemy commander had ever shown concern for my warriors' lives before, so I agreed to meet him on a neutral shuttle, halfway between our fleets." Vexthera stood and began pacing again, her movements betraying the emotional weight of the memory. "Colonel Webb was not what I expected. He was older than most human soldiers I had encountered, with gray hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of years of difficult decisions. But what struck me most was how he greeted me. How? He saluted, not in the mocking way an enemy might, but with genuine respect. Then he said, "General, I've read the reports from your previous campaigns. You're known for treating prisoners well and allowing medics to tend to wounded enemies. That tells me you understand that warriors on both sides have families waiting for them to come home." Vexthera's voice grew softer. It was true. I had always followed the old codes of honor, even when fighting species that did not. But no enemy had ever acknowledged it before. Webb continued, "I'm not going to ask you to abandon your mission. I know you have orders. But I want to propose something unusual." What did he propose? Kira leaned forward. A series of single combats between champions, winner takes all. It would save thousands of lives on both sides. But I had to refuse. My orders were specific. The High Command wanted Terra's Gate taken by force, as an example to other human colonies. Webb nodded when I explained this, and said something that haunts me to this day. That's when I began to suspect it. Vexthera corrected. The real revelation came during the battle itself. We launched our assault at dawn, expecting fierce but conventional resistance. Instead, we found something extraordinary. The general's eyes seemed to focus on something far beyond the station walls. The humans had prepared the battlefield in ways we never imagined. They had turned the asteroid's mining tunnels into a maze of defensive positions, each one designed not just to inflict casualties, but to force us to make moral choices. What kind of choices? Imagine a corridor where you could advance, but only by destroying a medical bay full of wounded soldiers, both human and Korthic prisoners from earlier battles. Imagine a strategic position that you could take, but only by collapsing a section that would kill civilian workers trapped below. At every turn, the humans forced us to choose between tactical advantage and honor. Vexthera's voice grew heavy with emotion. But the most extraordinary thing was their medics. Led by a human named Sarah Chen, they moved freely through the battlefield, treating wounded soldiers from both sides. Dr. Chen was a small woman, barely reaching my shoulder, but she walked through active combat zones as if she were invincible. "Surely your soldiers must have fired on her," Kira said. "Some tried, but word spread quickly through our ranks about what she was doing." I watched through my command scope as Dr. Chen spent 20 minutes under heavy fire, trying to save one of my junior officers who had been caught in an explosion. She could have retreated to safety, but she stayed until she had stabilized his wounds and gotten him to shelter. Vexthera sat down heavily, her armor creaking. That officer was my nephew, Kexthera. He was young, eager to prove himself in battle. The explosion should have killed him, but Dr. Chen's quick thinking saved his life. When she was finished, she looked up at my command position and saluted. Not mockingly, but with the same respect she would show her own commanders. "What happened to her?" Kira asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Dr. Chen died on the third day of the battle. She was trying to reach a group of wounded soldiers, a mix of humans and Korthics, who were trapped in a collapsed section. The area was still taking fire from both sides, but she went in anyway. A plasma burst caught her just as she reached the wounded. Vexthera's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of deep distress. But even as she was dying, she kept working. She used her last moments to treat the wounds of a Korthic warrior who had been trying to kill her just hours before. Lieutenant Jexamore told me later that her final words were instructions on how to treat his injuries. The observation deck fell silent except for the distant hum of the station's engines. Kira waited respectfully as Vexthera composed herself. "The battle turned on the 5th day," the general continued. "We had finally broken through their outer defenses and were closing in on the command center. Victory seemed certain. That's when I encountered Lieutenant Jake Morrison." Who was he? A young human officer, maybe 25 years old. He was leading a squad of Marines in a desperate rearguard action, buying time for civilians to evacuate deeper into the asteroid. His position was hopeless. Surrounded, outnumbered, running low on ammunition. But he kept fighting. Vexthera stood and walked back to the window. I was leading the final assault personally when Morrison's squad made their last stand. They had taken position in a narrow corridor, using every piece of cover they could find. Morrison was in the center, coordinating his soldiers' fire and trying to keep their spirits up. I could have simply ordered my warriors to overwhelm them with superior numbers. It would have been quick and efficient. But something made me pause. I activated my external speakers and called out to Morrison. I offered him the same deal I had offered Captain Vasquez: surrender and live. Did he accept? Kira asked. He laughed, not bitterly or mockingly, but with genuine humor. Then he said, "General, with respect, I've heard about your previous battles. I know you keep your word. But I also know that behind us are 300 civilians, including children and elderly, who can't defend themselves. So I'm going to have to respectfully decline your offer." Vexthera's reflection in the window seemed to shimmer with unshed tears. The final assault began moments later. Morrison's squad fought like demons, making us pay for every meter of corridor. But they were overwhelmed, as we all knew they would be. Morrison himself was the last one standing, his rifle empty, facing my warriors with nothing but a combat knife. "What happened next changed everything," she continued. A stray plasma bolt, fired by one of my own warriors in the heat of battle, ricocheted off the metal walls. It was heading straight for me, and I was too focused on Morrison to dodge in time. That bolt would have killed me instantly. Kira held her breath. Morrison threw himself between me and that plasma bolt. A human soldier, my enemy, sacrificed his life to save mine. As he fell, he looked at me and said, Tell them we fought for what mattered." Vexthera turned away from the window, her compound eyes glistening. I knelt beside him as he died, this young human who had given his life to save his enemy. And in that moment, I understood something that changed me forever. Morrison didn't save me because he liked me or agreed with my cause. He saved me because it was the right thing to do. Because in his final moment, he chose compassion over hatred. The battle ended shortly after that. Colonel Webb surrendered the station rather than see more civilians killed. But before he formally handed over command, he made one final request. He asked that all the fallen, human and Korthek alike, be buried together in the asteroid's memorial garden. He said that in death, all warriors deserve equal honor. Vexthera sat back down on the bench, suddenly looking very tired. That night, I attended the memorial service. I watched human families grieve for their dead alongside Korthek families. I saw children of both species playing together while their parents mourned. And I realized that everything I had believed about strength and warfare was wrong. Wrong how? Kira asked softly. I had thought strength meant the ability to destroy your enemies. I had thought victory meant imposing your will through superior force. But these humans taught me that true strength comes from choosing to protect others, even at the cost of your own life. They showed me that real victory isn't about conquest. It's about making sacrifices that preserve what matters most. Vexthera looked directly at Kira. 3 days after the battle, I submitted my resignation to the High Command. I told them I was no longer fit to lead Korthek warriors in battle. When they asked why, I told them the truth. I had learned that our enemies were better warriors than we were. Better how? Kira asked. You won the battle. Did we? Yes, we took the station. Yes, we achieved our tactical objectives. But we lost something far more important. We lost our souls. The humans never did. Even in defeat, even in death, they held on to what made them who they were. They fought not for glory or conquest, but for love. For the people they cared about. For ideals that were worth dying for. The general stood and walked toward the exit of the observation deck. That's why I left the military, young reporter. That's why I now work as a peace negotiator instead of a warrior. Because I learned from the humans that some battles are won by refusing to fight them. that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose understanding over conflict. One final question. Kira called after her. Do you regret your military career? Vexthera paused at the doorway. I regret many things. I regret the lives lost, the suffering caused, the opportunities for peace that were missed. But I don't regret meeting those humans. They taught me that even in the darkest moments of war, there is room for honor, compassion, and hope. They showed me that true warriors don't fight because they hate what's in front of them. They fight because they love what's behind them. With that, General Vexthera walked away, leaving Kira alone with her recording device and a story that would change how the galaxy viewed both humanity and warfare itself. Through the vast windows, the stars continued their eternal dance, silent witnesses to the courage and sacrifice that had transformed an enemy into an advocate for peace. In the distance, a human transport ship passed by the station, its lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Kira watched it go and wondered what other lessons humanity might teach the galaxy if only they were willing to listen.